Why did all the cows die on Halloween night? Sarah adjusted the strap of her dust mask as she climbed the creaky wooden ladder into the attic. The air was thick with the musty scent of old wood and forgotten memories. But she had promised herself and her mother that this farmhouse would be ready for sale by spring. It wasn't going to clean itself. Her flashlight beams swept across piles of yellowed newspapers, rusted tools, and boxes overflowing with brittle photographs. She sighed, brushing cobwebs from her sleeve. Then something caught her eye, a small trunk tucked away in the far corner, its leather straps cracked with age. Curious, Sarah knelt beside it and unlatched the buckles. Inside lay an assortment of odds and ends, faded postcards, a tarnished pocket watch, and at the very bottom, a weathered, leather-bound journal. Her heart quickened when she saw her grandfather's initials, etched faintly on the cover J.A.H. James Harper, the man whose stories had filled her childhood evenings. She opened the journal carefully, afraid the brittle pages might crumble beneath her fingers. As she flipped through the entries, she realized these weren't just casual musings. They were meticulous records of events leading up to one specific date, October 31st, 1968, the year he stopped farming and moved into town without explanation. Strange lights in the sky. The first few entries described unremarkable days, crops needing tending, repairs around the barn, visits from neighbors. But then, about 2 weeks before Halloween, the tone shifted. September 17th, 1968. Saw lights again tonight. Couldn't have been lightning. They hovered too long over the fields near Miller's Ridge. Animals restless all evening. Even old Bess wouldn't settle down in her stall. Sarah frowned. Her grandfather had always been practical, not prone to superstition or wild imagination. What could have unsettled him so much? Another entry followed. September 24th, 1968. More lights last night, this time closer, almost like they were watching us. Heard rumors at the feed store that others have seen them too, though no one will talk openly about it. Something feels wrong. Can't put my finger on it yet. A chill ran down Sarah's spine despite the stifling heat of the attic. Whatever those lights were, they clearly unnerved him. And if he thought they were dangerous enough to write about, why hadn't anyone else mentioned them? Odd behavior among animals. As Sarah continued reading, the entries grew darker. The animals on the farm began behaving strangely, refusing to eat, pacing nervously, even attacking each other. One particularly haunting passage stood out. October 5th, 1968. Found Charlie dead this morning. No marks on him, nothing to suggest predators. Just lying there in the field where we left him yesterday. Eyes wide open, staring at nothing. Betty says I'm imagining things, but I know what I saw. He looked terrified. I've started locking the chickens inside the coop after dark. Don't know why. It doesn't feel safe anymore. Sarah paused, rubbing her temples. Her grandmother, Betty, rarely spoke about life on the farm, and now Sarah understood why. There was more here than met the eye, some shadow lurking beneath the surface of their family history. Warnings against opening doors, best left shut. Then came the most cryptic entry of all. October 10th, 1968. Met with Harold and Tom tonight near the South Barn. They didn't want to come, not until I swore on my life it was important. We talked about the lights, the animals, everything. They think I'm crazy, but deep down they've noticed it too. Strange how silence can weigh heavier than words sometimes. Harold said something tonight that stuck with me. Some doors are meant to stay shut. Didn't ask what he meant. Maybe I should have. Sarah's pulse quickened. A secret meeting? Why hadn't anyone ever mentioned this before? She turned the page eagerly, hoping for answers, but found only blank sheets. Frustrated, she flipped back to earlier sections, searching for clues. That's when she spotted it. A single line buried in an earlier entry, almost as if her grandfather had tried to erase it. October 3rd, 1968. Heard noises coming from the barn late last night. Thought it was raccoons at first, but then I saw shadows moving inside. Too big to be animals. Didn't investigate further. Cows died the next morning. Sarah froze. The cows dying had been part of the official story her mother told her years ago. An illness swept through the herd, forcing her grandfather to sell off the farm. But according to the journal, there was more to it. Much more. She closed the book slowly, her mind racing. Who were the men who met secretly near the barn? What did they discuss? And what exactly happened to the cows? Most importantly, what doors had her grandfather feared opening? Downstairs, the grandfather clock chimed noon, startling her. For the first time since arriving at the farmhouse, Sarah felt uneasy, as if someone or something was watching her. She glanced toward the attic window, half expecting to see strange lights hovering above the fields. But the sky was empty. For now. The next morning, Sarah drove into town with the journal tucked safely under her arm. The streets of Willow Creek were quiet, as they always were on weekdays. A few cars idled outside the post office, and Mr. Henderson waved lazily from his perch on the hardware store's porch. It was a sleepy little place, untouched by time, or so it seemed. But Sarah knew better now. Beneath the surface of this quaint rural life lay secrets buried deep enough to suffocate anyone who dared dig them up, and she intended to dig. Her first stop was the diner, where most of the town gathered for coffee and gossip. She slid onto a stool at the counter and ordered a cup before pulling out her phone. Feigning casual interest, she asked the waitress, a middle-aged woman named Linda, if she'd ever heard about strange happenings on the old Harper farm back in '68. Linda hesitated mid-pour, her hand trembling slightly. "Why you asking about that?" she said, her voice low. "Oh, just curious," Sarah replied, keeping her tone light. "I found some old notes of my grandfather's while cleaning out the attic. He mentioned odd lights in the sky and dying livestock. Thought maybe someone around here might remember." The diner fell eerily silent. Conversation stopped, forks clinked against plates, and eyes darted towards Sarah but quickly looked away. Linda forced a tight smile. "Folks around here don't talk much about things like that. Probably just superstition anyway." Sarah nodded slowly, pretending to accept the answer, but she wasn't convinced. There was something in Linda's voice. Fear? Regret? She couldn't quite put her finger on it. After lunch, Sarah decided to visit Mrs. Whitaker, an elderly neighbor who lived across the road from the Harper farm for decades. If anyone would know what really happened, it was her. Mrs. Whitaker greeted her warmly, ushering her inside with a cup of tea and a plate of homemade cookies. Her house smelled of lavender and lemon polish, a comforting contrast to the unsettling topic Sarah planned to broach. "I suppose you're wondering about your grandfather's journal," Mrs. Whitaker said after a few minutes of small talk. Her sharp blue eyes studied Sarah over the rim of her teacup. Sarah blinked in surprise. "You know about it?" "Not specifically, no, but I saw the way you've been poking around town, asking questions." She set the cup down with a soft clink. "People get nervous when old wounds are reopened, dear, especially wounds like those." "What do you mean?" Sarah leaned forward, gripping the edge of the table. "What aren't they telling me?" Mrs. Whitaker sighed heavily, her gaze drifting toward the window. Outside, golden leaves tumbled across the yard, carried by a crisp autumn breeze. "Willow Creek isn't as innocent as it appears," she said finally. "There are shadows here, darker than most folks care to admit. Your grandfather, well, he stumbled upon one of them." Sarah swallowed hard. "The lights in the sky? The cows dying? What caused all that?" Mrs. Whitaker shook her head. "I can't say for certain. All I know is that something changed that Halloween night. Something bad. Folks whispered about it for years afterward, but eventually they stopped talking altogether, like they hoped forgetting would make it go away." She reached across the table, her gnarled fingers closing gently around Sarah's wrist. "Be careful, child. Not everything that's buried should be unearthed." Over the next few days, Sarah approached other townsfolk, each conversation ending similarly: evasive answers, nervous glances, or outright refusal to discuss the events of 1968. One man, a retired mechanic named Carl, slammed the door in her face when she brought up the subject. Another, a librarian named Ruth, whispered urgently, "You're stirring up trouble you don't understand. Leave it alone." Yet despite their reluctance, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was getting closer to the truth. Every hint, every half-answer, pointed to the same conclusion. Whatever had happened on her grandfather's farm wasn't natural, and it wasn't over. One evening, as she sat alone in the farmhouse kitchen, flipping through the journal again, a knock echoed through the quiet house. Startled, she glanced at the clock. It was nearly 10 o'clock. Who could possibly be visiting at this hour? Cautiously, she opened the front door and froze. Standing on the porch was Harold, one of the men mentioned in the journal. Now in his late 80s, his once broad frame was stooped with age, but his eyes were sharp and wary. "I heard you've been asking questions," he rasped, clutching a cane. "About the barn, about the lights." Sarah's heart pounded. "Yes," she said carefully. "Do you know what happened?" Harold hesitated, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting someone or something to appear behind him. Then he stepped closer, lowering his voice to a near whisper. "We shouldn't have gone out there that night," he muttered. "We thought we could stop it. Instead, we made it worse." "Stop what?" Sarah pressed, her pulse racing. "What did you see?" Harold didn't answer directly. Instead, he handed her a folded piece of paper. "Read this," he said, "and then decide if you really want to keep digging." Before she could respond, he turned and shuffled back toward his car, leaving her standing alone on the porch with the mysterious note clutched in her hand. The next morning, Sarah decided to follow up on Harold's cryptic warning. She unfolded the note he'd given her, her fingers trembling slightly. Inside was a single sentence scrawled in shaky handwriting. "Check Dr. Ellis's old files." Dr. Ellis? The name rang a faint bell. After a moment, she remembered. He had been the town veterinarian back in the 1960s. If anyone would have insight into what killed the cows, it would be him. A quick search online confirmed that Dr. Ellis was still alive, though retired and living in a nursing home just outside Willow Creek. With growing determination, Sarah drove there later that afternoon. The nursing home smelled faintly of antiseptic and potpourri, its halls lined with faded photographs of smiling residents. At the front desk, Sarah asked for Dr. Ellis and was directed to a small lounge where an elderly man sat alone by the window, staring out at the autumn leaves drifting across the lawn. "Dr. Ellis?" she said softly as she approached. He turned slowly, his eyes clouded with age but still sharp enough to assess her face. "Yes? Who are you?" "My name is Sarah Harper," she replied, taking a seat beside him. "I'm James Harper's granddaughter." Recognition flickered in his gaze, followed by something else. Unease. "James Harper," he murmured. "It's been years since I've thought about that night." Sarah leaned forward, her voice steady despite the knot tightening in her stomach. "That's why I'm here. I found my grandfather's journal, and it mentions strange things happening around the time the cows died. I need to know what really happened." Dr. Ellis sighed deeply, his weathered hands gripping the arms of his chair. For a long moment, he didn't speak, as if weighing whether or not to trust her. Finally, he nodded. "All right," he said quietly, "but this isn't easy to talk about, and you may not like what I have to say." Dr. Ellis explained that he had been called out to the Harper farm early one October morning after the cows were discovered dead in the field. When he arrived, he could tell immediately that something wasn't right. Their bodies showed no signs of illness or injury, he said, shaking his head. No bloating, no lesions, nothing consistent with disease. It was like their life force had simply been drained out of them. Sarah felt a chill creep up her spine. "What did you think caused it?" "I didn't know," he admitted, "but I suspected it wasn't natural. That's when the trouble started." He paused, his expression pained. "Later that day, some influential men came to see me, town council members, business owners. They pressured me to falsify my report, claiming the deaths were due to a sudden outbreak of anthrax, said it would protect the town's reputation, keep people from panicking." "They wanted you to lie?" Sarah asked, incredulous. "They made it clear I didn't have a choice," Dr. Ellis replied bitterly. "They threatened to revoke my license, ruin me financially. So I did what they asked, but I couldn't forget what I'd seen, or how wrong it felt. As Sarah listened, the pieces began falling into place. The strange lights in the sky, the odd behavior of the animals, the secret meeting near the barn. It all pointed to something far bigger than anyone had let on. "Do you think those men knew more than they were saying?" she asked. Dr. Ellis hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "I think they did. Whatever happened that night scared them too. Scared them enough to try covering it up." "But why?" Sarah pressed. "What were they trying to hide?" The old veterinarian shook his head again, his eyes distant. "I wish I knew. All I can tell you is that it wasn't just about the cows. There was something else, something dangerous." He reached into the pocket of his cardigan and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This might help you," he said, handing it to her. "I kept copies of my original notes from that night. I never trusted myself to destroy them completely." Sarah took the paper with trembling hands. Unfolding it, she saw sketches and observations detailing the condition of the cows' bodies, along with a hastily scribbled note in the margin. "Unexplained energy signature detected near barn." Her breath caught. "Did you find evidence of something unnatural?" "I don't know what to call it," Dr. Ellis admitted. "But whatever it was, it left traces. Traces that shouldn't exist." As Sarah thanked Dr. Ellis and prepared to leave, he grabbed her wrist gently, his grip surprisingly strong for someone so frail. "Be careful," he warned. "If you're digging into this, you're treading on ground that's best left untouched. Some secrets aren't meant to be uncovered." His words echoed Mrs. Whitaker's warning, sending a shiver down Sarah's spine. Yet even as fear prickled at the edges of her mind, she couldn't ignore the pull of curiosity. Injustice. Her grandfather had tried to warn others, only to be silenced. Now it was her turn to uncover the truth. Back in her car, she unfolded the copied notes once more, studying them carefully. Whatever had happened on the Harper farm 50 years ago, it hadn't stayed buried. And judging by the reactions of everyone she'd spoken to, it might not stay quiet much longer. Sarah spent the next few days poring over old records at the town library, her mind racing with questions. The veterinarian's notes had hinted at something otherworldly, but what could possibly connect occult rituals from a century ago to the strange events on her grandfather's farm in 1968? And why did everyone seem so desperate to keep these secrets buried? Her research led her to dusty archives and brittle newspaper clippings stored in the basement of the library. Most were mundane accounts of farming life, festivals, and local politics, but tucked among them were fragments of darker stories. One headline caught her eye: "Tragedy strikes settlers gathering, 9 dead in mysterious fire, 1903. The article described how a group of settlers had gathered on land that would later become the Harper farm for what was initially reported as a harvest celebration. But eyewitnesses claimed the event turned sinister when eerie chants echoed through the night, followed by an inexplicable fire that consumed 9 people. Authorities ruled it an accident, but whispers of foul play, and worse, spread quickly through the community. Another clipping mentioned rumors of occult practices tied to the settlers' belief in harnessing supernatural forces to ensure prosperity. According to legend, they believed the land itself held special power, capable of granting abundant crops if appeased properly. However, their attempts to tap into this power allegedly backfired, resulting in tragedy and leaving behind a lingering curse. Sarah's pulse quickened as she read further. Over the decades, occasional reports surfaced of unexplained phenomena near the site: livestock behaving erratically, crops failing without explanation, and even sightings of ghostly figures wandering the fields. Locals dismissed such tales as superstition, yet the whispers persisted, passed down like heirlooms through generations. One particularly chilling document stood out: a handwritten account from a woman named Abigail Crawford, dated 1922. Sarah recognized the name. Abigail had been one of Willow Creek's earliest schoolteachers. Her letter was addressed to the town council, pleading for action after witnessing bizarre occurrences on her property adjacent to the Harper farm. "I cannot ignore what I have seen," Abigail wrote. "The ground seems alive, trembling beneath my feet as though it breathes. My chickens refuse to roost at night. And my dog has gone mad, barking at shadows only he can see. Last week, I found 3 dead crows arranged in a perfect circle outside my door. No animal could do such a thing. She went on to describe hearing faint chanting coming from the woods late at night, accompanied by flickering lights similar to those described in her grandfather's journal. Abigail begged the council to investigate, but according to marginal notes scrawled on the document, her concerns were ignored. A note from the mayor simply read, "Superstition, advise against stirring panic." Sarah sat back, her hands trembling slightly. It seemed the land beneath the Harper farm carried a dark legacy, one that refused to stay silent. That evening, Sarah returned to the farmhouse, the weight of her discoveries pressing heavily on her shoulders. She spread the documents across the kitchen table, piecing together the fragments of Willow Creek's hidden history. In the early 1900s, settlers performed occult rituals on the land, believing it held supernatural power. Tragedy struck, leading to abandonment of the practices, but not before a supposed curse took root. Decades later, strange phenomena continued to plague the area, culminating in the events of 1968. Her grandfather's journal now made grim sense. The strange lights, the dying animals, the warnings about opening doors best left shut, all pointed to the resurgence of something ancient and malevolent, something the townsfolk had tried desperately to bury along with their ancestors' sins. But there was still one question Sarah couldn't answer. What exactly triggered the events of Halloween night in 1968? Why then? And what role had her grandfather played in trying to stop it? As Sarah stared at the documents, lost in thought, headlights swept across the windows, illuminating the darkened room. Startled, she rose from the table and peeked outside. A car she didn't recognize idled in the driveway. Moments later, a knock echoed through the house. Cautiously, she opened the door to find Mrs. Whitaker standing on the porch, her face pale and drawn. "You need to stop this, Sarah," the elderly woman said without preamble, "before it's too late." "Too late for what?" Sarah asked sharply. "What are you talking about?" Mrs. Whitaker stepped inside, closing the door behind her. Her eyes darted nervously toward the windows, as if expecting someone or something to be watching. "I know more than I've told you," she admitted, "about the rituals, about the curse, and about your grandfather." Sarah crossed her arms, her heart pounding. "Then tell me everything." Mrs. Whitaker hesitated, then nodded slowly. "All right, but first you need to understand, the land doesn't forget, and sometimes it demands payment." Mrs. Whitaker settled into the creaky wooden chair at the kitchen table, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Sarah sat across from her, the weight of the older woman's words hanging heavy in the air. The farmhouse was silent, except for the occasional groan of the old floorboards and the distant hoot of an owl outside. "Your grandfather wasn't just stubborn," Mrs. Whitaker began, her voice low but steady. "He was scared, terrified even. Not for himself, though. For all of us." Sarah leaned forward, her curiosity burning brighter than ever. "What do you mean? What was he protecting us from?" Mrs. Whitaker sighed deeply, as if bracing herself to reveal something she'd carried for decades. "James knew things about this land that no one else did, or wanted to believe. Things he discovered after inheriting the farm from your great-grandparents. He used to say the soil here wasn't just dirt, it was alive, listening, waiting." She paused, glancing around the room as if afraid the walls might hear her. "And he swore up and down that disturbing it would wake something ancient, something evil." Sarah frowned, trying to reconcile this image of her grandfather with the quiet, practical man she remembered. "But why didn't he sell? If he thought the land was dangerous, wouldn't it have been safer to let someone else deal with it?" Mrs. Whitaker shook her head emphatically. "That's what everyone else wanted him to do, including the town elders. Developers came sniffing around for years, offering ridiculous sums of money. They said they'd turn the property into a housing development or a shopping center. But James refused every offer, said selling would unleash whatever was buried beneath the surface. He believed the curse was real?" Sarah asked, incredulous. not just believed it, he knew it, Mrs. Whitaker replied firmly. He spent years studying the history of this place, digging through old records, talking to anyone who'd listen. He uncovered stories about those settlers, the ones who performed the rituals, and their belief that the land could grant unimaginable power if handled correctly. But they got greedy, pushed too far, and when tragedy struck, they abandoned the practices, hoping to contain whatever they'd awakened. But clearly they failed, Sarah murmured, thinking of the strange lights, the dying animals, and the ominous warnings in her grandfather's journal. Mrs. Whitaker nodded grimly. Whatever they summoned never left. It's been here all along, biding its time. James knew that better than anyone. That's why he fought so hard to keep developers away. He said if they started digging, drilling, building, she trailed off, shuddering visibly. Well, let's just say he didn't think Willow Creek would survive it. Sarah's mind raced as she absorbed this new information. Her grandfather hadn't simply been a farmer clinging to his ancestral home out of sentimentality. He'd been standing guard over a secret that could destroy the entire town. What happened between him and the town elders? She asked. Did they pressure him to sell? Mrs. Whitaker nodded again, her expression darkening. Oh, they tried everything. Sweet talk, threats, bribes, you name it. When none of that worked, they turned nasty, spread rumors about him being unstable, irrational. Some even accused him of poisoning his own cows to scare off buyers. Can you imagine? Sarah's stomach churned at the thought. No wonder her grandfather had moved into town after that fateful Halloween night. The isolation, the mistrust, it must have been unbearable. They couldn't understand why he cared so much, Mrs. Whitaker continued. To them, it was just land, dirt and rocks. But James saw it differently. To him, it was a responsibility, a burden handed down through generations. And he took it seriously. As Mrs. Whitaker spoke, Sarah found herself looking at the farmhouse and the surrounding fields with fresh eyes. This wasn't just a piece of property waiting to be sold. It was a battleground, a line drawn between safety and chaos. Her grandfather had spent his life defending that line, even if it cost him friendships, respect, and peace of mind. Do you think he succeeded? Sarah asked quietly. In keeping it contained, I mean. Mrs. Whitaker hesitated, her gaze dropping to the table. For a while, yes, until 1968. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. You think whatever happened that night broke the seal? Released whatever was trapped? I don't know for sure, Mrs. Whitaker admitted, but I do know this. James changed after that. He stopped talking about the land altogether, stopped going near the fields, acted like he was afraid even mentioning it might invite trouble. And now, Sarah pressed, if whatever's out there is still active, what happens next? Mrs. Whitaker met her gaze, her blue eyes sharp and piercing. That depends on you, dear. You're the one stirring things up now, asking questions, digging where others were too afraid to look. After Mrs. Whitaker left, Sarah remained at the table, staring at the scattered documents in her grandfather's weathered journal. Each page seemed heavier than before, laden with secrets she wasn't sure she was ready to face. Her phone buzzed on the message only strengthened her resolve. The counter, breaking the silence. It was a text from an unknown number. Leave it alone, Sarah, for your sake and ours. Her blood ran cold. Someone was watching her, someone who didn't want her digging deeper. But whatever lay buried beneath the Harper farm, it had already claimed too much. Her grandfather's peace, the lives of innocent animals, perhaps even the 9 settlers who died in that mysterious fire over a century ago. She couldn't walk away now, not when the truth was finally within reach. The next morning, Sarah decided to visit her Uncle Thomas, the only living relative who might shed more light on her grandfather's growing isolation in the years following 1968. Thomas, now in his late 70s, lived alone in a modest apartment on the outskirts of Willow Creek. Though frail and slowed by age, his sharp mind remained intact, and he had always been unusually tight-lipped about family history. When Sarah arrived, Thomas greeted her warmly, but seemed surprised by her unexpected visit. Over coffee at his cluttered kitchen table, She broached the subject cautiously. I've been going through Grandpa James's journal, she began, watching his face closely for any flicker of emotion. There's so much I didn't know about what happened back then. About the land, the lights, everything. Thomas stiffened slightly, his weathered hands pausing mid-pour as he set the coffee pot down. For a moment he said nothing, his gaze fixed on the steam rising from his cup. You shouldn't dig into that, he finally muttered, his voice gruff. Some things are better left alone. Sarah leaned forward, undeterred. I can't just ignore it, Uncle Thomas. Whatever happened on that farm, it shaped our family. Shaped him, I need to understand. He sighed heavily, running a hand over his thinning gray hair. Fine, he said after a long pause, but don't say I didn't warn you. Thomas explained that their grandfather hadn't always been the quiet, reserved man Sarah remembered. In his younger days, James Harper was known for his sharp wit and outspoken nature. He'd never hesitated to challenge authority or speak his mind, especially when it came to protecting the farm. But after 1968, Thomas trailed off, shaking his head. Something changed him, broke him almost. He became withdrawn, paranoid, started accusing people, powerful people, of being involved in whatever happened that night. Accusing them of what? Sarah asked, her pulse quickening. Thomas hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. He thought they were using the land for something sinister, that they knew more about those rituals than they let on. Said they'd pressured him for years to sell because they wanted access to whatever was buried beneath the soil. Buried? You mean like artifacts or relics from the settlers? No, Thomas replied sharply. Not artifacts, power, energy. Something alive. At least that's how he described it. He believed those men, town elders, developers, businessmen, were trying to exploit it, harness it for themselves. Sarah felt a chill creep up her spine. And did they succeed? I don't think so, Thomas admitted. At least not completely. But your grandfather was convinced they tried, and that their meddling unleashed, well, whatever it was that killed the cows and scared everyone half to death. As Sarah pressed further, Thomas revealed that James's suspicions had driven a wedge between him and nearly everyone in town, including his own family. He started seeing enemies everywhere, Thomas recalled, his tone tinged with sadness. Thought folks were spying on him, reporting back to the town elders. Even accused me once of leaking information about the farm to one of their cronies. It tore us apart. Sarah frowned, struggling to reconcile this version of her grandfather with the man she remembered. Do you think he was right? About the town elders, I mean? Thomas shrugged helplessly. I don't know. Maybe. All I know is that he wasn't crazy. Not entirely. There were too many coincidences. The sudden interest in buying the land, the strange accidents that kept happening around the property, the way people stopped talking to us altogether. It felt orchestrated. And you never confronted anyone about it? What could I do? Thomas shot back, his voice rising slightly. They controlled everything. The bank, the council, the police. If James made waves, they'd crush him, and us along with him. So we stayed quiet, kept our heads down. His shoulders sagged as he finished speaking, the weight of decades-old fear and frustration evident in every line of his face. After leaving Thomas's apartment, Sarah drove back to the farmhouse, her thoughts swirling. Her grandfather hadn't simply been a victim of circumstance. He'd been a man caught in a battle far larger than himself, a battle against forces both supernatural and human. She pulled into the driveway and sat in the car for a moment, staring at the fields stretching out before her. The land looked peaceful under the autumn sun, golden and serene. But she knew better now. Beneath its surface lay secrets and dangers that had haunted her family for generations. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her from her reverie. Another anonymous text. You're treading dangerous ground. Stop while you still can. This time, instead of fear, anger surged within her. Whoever these people were, they weren't going to silence her. Not until she uncovered the truth. Inside the farmhouse, she retrieved her grandfather's journal and flipped to an entry near the end, a passage she'd skimmed earlier, now read with renewed focus. October 30th, 1968. I saw them tonight, near the ridge where the lights appeared. They think I don't know what they're planning, but I do. Harold tried to warn me, to tell me to leave it be, but it's too late for that. If they open the door, there'll be no closing it again. And if I try to stop them, God help me. Tomorrow is Halloween. I pray it doesn't come to bloodshed. Sarah closed the journal, her heart pounding. Her grandfather had known exactly what was at stake, and he'd been willing to risk everything to protect the town. But had he succeeded? Or had the town elders succeeded in opening the door he feared? One thing was certain. She couldn't walk away now. The answers lay somewhere in the shadows of Willow Creek's past, and she intended to find them, no matter the cost. As the days passed, Sarah's investigation deepened, but so did the strange occurrences surrounding her. At first, they were subtle enough to dismiss as fatigue or imagination. A light bulb flickering in the kitchen, the faint sound of footsteps upstairs when she was alone in the farmhouse. But soon the phenomena grew more pronounced and far harder to ignore. One evening, as dust settled over Willow Creek and painted the fields in hues of orange and purple, Sarah sat at the kitchen table poring over her grandfather's journal and the notes she gathered from Dr. Ellis and Mrs. Whitaker. The house creaked softly around her, its familiar noises blending with the distant rustle of leaves outside. She barely noticed when the overhead light began to dim, casting long shadows across the room. Then it happened, a sharp pop as the bulb went out entirely, plunging the space into darkness. Her breath hitched, and she reached for her phone to use as a flashlight. Just as the screen illuminated the room, she heard it, a low, guttural whisper that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere all at once. "Leave!" Sarah froze, her heart pounding. The voice wasn't human. It was too distorted, too hollow, like wind howling through an empty cavern. She scanned the room, half expecting to see someone standing there, but she was utterly alone. "It's just stress," she muttered aloud, trying to steady her nerves. "You're tired. It's nothing." But even as she said it, she couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was watching her. Over the next few nights, the disturbances escalated. Doors slammed shut on their own. Windows rattled violently despite the calm weather. One morning, she found claw-like scratches gouged into the wooden floorboards near the front door, though no animal could have possibly entered the house. The most unnerving incident occurred late one night when she woke suddenly to the sound of chanting. Faint at first, the murmurs grew louder, resonating through the walls of the farmhouse like a chorus of disembodied voices. They spoke in a language she didn't recognize, guttural syllables interspersed with rhythmic tones that sent chills coursing down her spine. She bolted out of bed and grabbed the baseball bat she'd started keeping nearby, her hands trembling as she crept toward the source of the noise. It led her to the attic, the same place where she had discovered her grandfather's journal. The chanting stopped abruptly as she pushed open the door, leaving only silence behind. Yet as she stepped inside, she felt it, an oppressive weight pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. In the corner of the room, hovering inches above the trunk that had held the journal, was a faint red glow, like embers smoldering in the dark. Sarah backed away slowly, clutching the bat tightly, until she reached the ladder. She descended quickly, slamming the attic door shut behind her and bolting it with shaking hands. If the waking world was unsettling, the dreams were worse. Each night, Sarah found herself trapped in vivid nightmares that felt disturbingly real. She stood in the middle of vast, barren fields under skies streaked with crimson clouds. A blood-red moon hung low on the horizon, bathing the landscape in an eerie, scarlet light. In these dreams, shadowy figures moved silently among the rows of dead crops, their forms indistinct but undeniably menacing. Sometimes they whispered her name, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of whispers that echoed endlessly. Other times they simply watched her, their glowing eyes fixed on hers with an intensity that made her skin crawl. One dream repeated itself more than any other. Sarah stood at the edge of the south barn, the same one mentioned in her grandfather's journal, as a figure emerged from within. Cloaked in darkness, its face obscured, it extended a skeletal hand toward her, beckoning her closer. Every time she tried to run, but her feet were rooted to the spot, unable to move as the figure drew nearer. When she finally woke, drenched in sweat and gasping for air, she realized the barn door was wide open. She was certain she'd locked it before going to bed. Despite the mounting fear, Sarah refused to let the phenomena deter her. If anything, they only fueled her determination to uncover the truth. Whatever force lingered on the land, it wanted her to leave. But she wasn't about to give up now. Her research intensified. She scoured old maps of the property, searching for clues about the settlers' rituals and the exact location where the tragedy had occurred. She revisited the veterinarian's notes, focusing on the mention of an unexplained energy signature near the barn, and she reread her grandfather's journal obsessively, piecing together fragments of his final days leading up to Halloween 1968. It was during one such late-night session that she stumbled upon another cryptic entry. October 29, 1968. Found markings carved into the base of the oak tree near the ridge. Symbols I don't recognize. Harold says they're protective, meant to keep something out, or maybe in. I've started seeing them everywhere now, in the fields, on the barn walls, even scratched into the dirt. They appear overnight, as if someone is watching me, testing me. Whoever or whatever is doing this knows I'm onto them. Sarah stared at the page, her mind racing. Protective symbols, carved into the trees and soil? Was her grandfather trying to ward off the very thing he feared might emerge? The next day, armed with a camera and notebook, Sarah ventured out to the ridge her grandfather had mentioned. Sure enough, etched into the gnarled bark of an ancient oak tree were faded carvings, strange, angular symbols, unlike anything she'd ever seen. Some were nearly worn away by time, while others appeared fresh, as though recently inscribed. As she photographed the markings, a cold wind swept through the field, carrying with it the faint scent of earth and decay. She turned sharply, scanning the horizon, but saw nothing except the endless expanse of golden grass swaying in the breeze. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that something or someone was waiting for her to make the next move. By the time she returned to the farmhouse, her resolve had hardened. These weren't random occurrences, they were warnings, messages meant to scare her away. But Sarah knew better than to back down now. Whatever secrets lay buried beneath the Harper farm, they were tied to her family and to the fate of Willow Creek itself, and she intended to unearth every last one of them. Sarah's search for answers led her to Elijah Crane, a name she stumbled upon while digging through online archives of obscure folklore and historical accounts. According to rumors whispered among academics, Elijah was something of a legend in his field, a reclusive historian who had spent decades researching supernatural phenomena tied to rural America. His work often skirted the edges of credibility, blending meticulous scholarship with unorthodox theories about curses, ley lines, and ancient rituals. After some effort, Sarah tracked him down to a remote cabin nestled deep in the woods outside Willow Creek. The drive there was unsettling. The road narrowed until it was little more than a dirt path lined by towering trees that seemed to close in around her car. When she finally arrived, the cabin looked as though it belonged to another century. Weathered wood, crooked shutters, and a porch sagging under the weight of years. Elijah answered her knock slowly, peering out from behind a heavy oak door. He was tall and wiry, his face gaunt and shadowed by a thick beard streaked with gray. His piercing blue eyes studied her intently before he stepped aside to let her in. "I've been expecting you," he said simply, his voice low and gravelly. Sarah blinked in surprise. "You have?" He nodded, gesturing for her to sit at a small table cluttered with books, maps, and yellowed papers. Word travels fast when someone starts poking into things they shouldn't, especially here. As they spoke, Elijah revealed that he'd been following the reports of strange occurrences in Willow Creek for years, though he'd never dared to investigate too closely himself. "Places like this, they draw attention," he explained, "not just from curious outsiders like you, but from other forces. Forces most people don't want to believe exist." Sarah leaned forward, intrigued despite herself. "What kind of forces?" Elijah hesitated, then pulled a leather-bound notebook from a stack on the table. Flipping it open, he showed her sketches of symbols eerily similar to those carved into the oak tree near the ridge. "These are protective sigils," he said, "used by settlers across the country in attempts to contain or repel malevolent entities. Sometimes they worked. Other times—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "Other times what?" Sarah pressed. "Other times the barriers broke, and whatever was trapped came back stronger." His words sent a chill through her. She thought of the scratches on her floorboards, the flickering lights, the blood-red moon in her dreams. Could it all be connected? Dire consequences. Elijah warned her that meddling with buried secrets, especially ones tied to rituals and curses, was playing with fire. "People think these stories are superstition," he said grimly, "but history proves otherwise. Look at Roanoke. Look at the Bell Witch. Look at dozens of forgotten towns swallowed whole because someone thought they could control something beyond their understanding." He leaned closer, his gaze intense. "Your grandfather knew better than to disturb the land. That's why he refused to sell. But now you're digging deeper than even he did. Do you really want to risk unleashing what's buried beneath?" Sarah felt a pang of doubt, but only for a moment. "If I don't find out what happened, it'll keep haunting me, and maybe the whole town. I can't walk away." Elijah sighed heavily, clearly frustrated but not surprised. "Then at least listen to my advice. If you're going to continue, arm yourself with knowledge. Understand what you're dealing with before it's too late." With that, he handed her a slim volume bound in cracked leather. Its title was nearly illegible, but she caught fragments of words etched into the cover. "Rituals of binding seals of containment, curses unbroken." It felt heavier than it should have, as if its pages carried more than ink and paper. "This might help," Elijah said. "It contains instructions for creating wards, deciphering symbols, and, if necessary, resealing breaches. Use it wisely." Back at the farmhouse, Sarah pored over the book, her unease growing with each page. The text described rituals eerily similar to those performed by the settlers on her family's land. There were warnings about veins of power running beneath certain locations, capable of amplifying both creation and destruction. And there were dire accounts of what happened when such veins were disturbed. Crops failing en masse, livestock driven mad, entire communities falling prey to madness or worse. She couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. The phenomena around her were escalating, each day bringing new signs that whatever lay buried was stirring. The whispers grew louder, the dreams more vivid, and the symbols carved into the land began appearing closer to the house. One night, as she sat cross-legged on the living room floor surrounded by notes and books, she heard a loud crash from upstairs. Heart pounding, she grabbed the baseball bat and crept toward the noise. What she found stopped her cold. In the hallway, scrawled across the wall, in jagged letters formed from ash, were two words: "Stop digging." Sarah stared at the message, her hands trembling. Whoever, or whatever, was behind this knew exactly what she was doing. And it wanted her to stop. But how could she? Her grandfather had sacrificed everything to protect the land and the town from whatever lurked beneath. Now it was her turn to finish what he'd started. Armed with Elijah's book, her grandfather's journal, and the mounting evidence tying the past to the present, Sarah resolved to confront the truth head-on. She didn't know what awaited her at the end of this path, but she was determined to see it through, even if it meant facing the darkness herself. It was the faint scent of earth in decay that drew Sarah back to the barn late one afternoon. The structure loomed against the fading light, its weathered boards groaning softly in the breeze. She'd avoided it since her vivid dreams began, but something tugged at her, a pull she couldn't ignore. Inside, the air was heavy, thick with dust and the lingering remnants of hay and rusted tools. Her flashlight beam cut through the gloom as she scanned the walls, searching for anything unusual. It wasn't until she knelt near the far corner, where the floorboards felt uneven beneath her feet, that she noticed it. A narrow seam running along one plank. Her heart quickened as she pried the board loose with a crowbar. Beneath it lay a shallow compartment lined with oilcloth, its contents carefully preserved despite decades of neglect. Slowly, Sarah removed each item, laying them out on the dusty ground. The first object was a piece of wood no larger than her palm, etched with an intricate symbol that sent a shiver down her spine. Its design matched the carvings she'd seen on the oak tree near the ridge, and those described in Elijah's book. A sigil of containment, meant to bind or repel supernatural forces. Next came several small glass jars, their contents dried and brittle with age. She recognized some of the herbs from her research: wolfsbane, mandrake root, and rowan berries, all ingredients commonly used in protective rituals. Others were unfamiliar, their names scrawled on faded labels in spidery handwriting. But the most chilling discovery was the map. Rolled tightly and tied with twine, it unfurled to reveal a detailed rendering of the Harper property. Certain spots were marked with red X's, accompanied by cryptic notes written in the same hand as the jar labels. Ridge Energy Nexus, Strongest Point, Barn Convergence, Avoid Disturbing Soil, Miller's Hollow, Unstable Gateway. Sarah traced the markings with trembling fingers, her mind racing. These weren't random locations. They aligned perfectly with ley lines, the invisible pathways said to channel spiritual energy across the land. According to Elijah's book, such lines could amplify both benevolent and malevolent forces, depending on how they were harnessed. Her grandfather had known about this. He must have. Had he hidden these artifacts to protect them, or to keep others from using them? Back in the farmhouse, Sarah spread the map across the kitchen table, alongside Elijah's book and her grandfather's journal. As she compared the coordinates, a horrifying realization dawned on her. The settlers hadn't chosen the Harper farm by chance. They'd built their rituals around the ley lines, believing the land's natural energy would enhance their attempts to summon prosperity or power. But when tragedy struck in 1903, they likely abandoned the practices without fully reversing what they'd unleashed. Over time, the energy may have lain dormant until someone disturbed it again. Someone like the town elders who pressured her grandfather to sell. She flipped through the journal frantically, looking for confirmation. Sure enough, she found another entry near the end. October 27, 1968. Found evidence today that proves my worst fears. Those men, they've been digging near the ridge, tampering with the markers I set up years ago. If they break the seal, God help us all. A cold knot tightened in her stomach. Whatever the settlers had summoned, it hadn't been contained. Not completely, and now, thanks to the meddling of powerful individuals, it was stirring once more. Sarah studied the map again, focusing on the barn. The note beside its red X read, "Convergence, avoid disturbing soil." This explained why the barn seemed so central to the strange phenomena plaguing the property. It wasn't just a structure. It sat at the intersection of multiple ley lines, acting as a focal point for whatever energy coursed beneath the land. If the town elders, or anyone else, had tampered with the soil here, they might have weakened the barrier keeping the entity trapped. Her thoughts turned to the veterinarian's report about detecting an unexplained energy signature near the barn. Was that how they'd discovered its significance? Had they deliberately tried to exploit it? Whatever the case, Sarah knew one thing for certain. The barn was ground zero. If she wanted to understand what was happening and stop it, she'd need to confront the truth there. Armed with the knowledge gleaned from the artifacts in Elijah's book, Sarah began preparing for what lay ahead. She copied the protective sigils onto scraps of paper, tucking them into her pockets and boots. Using the herbs from the jars, she brewed a tea meant to sharpen focus and ward off negative influences, drinking it despite its bitter taste. She also gathered supplies: salt, a universal purifier, iron nails, believed to disrupt supernatural entities, and matches to create fire wards if necessary. Lastly, she retrieved the old pocket watch from the trunk where she'd found the journal. Its hands were frozen at 11:59, but something about it felt significant, as if it held a connection to her grandfather's efforts to contain the threat. As night fell, Sarah stood outside the barn, staring at a shadowy silhouette. The whispers were louder now, almost deafening, and the air crackled with static electricity. She could feel the weight of countless eyes watching her from the darkness. Taking a deep breath, she stepped inside. Sarah spent the next several days working closely with Elijah, piecing together the fragments of Willow Creek's dark history. The map, the artifacts, and her grandfather's journal became their Rosetta Stone, unlocking a narrative that had been buried for generations. What they uncovered was both horrifying and undeniable. The land beneath the Harper farm wasn't just cursed, it was a battleground where human greed clashed with forces beyond comprehension. Elijah meticulously cross-referenced the ley line coordinates on the map with historical records of unexplained events in Willow Creek. One pattern stood out starkly. Every major incident, the settlers' fire in 1903, the cows' deaths in 1968, even smaller anomalies like crop failures and animal mutilations, had occurred on or near significant dates tied to occult practices, particularly Halloween. "This isn't coincidence," Elijah said as he spread his notes across Sarah's kitchen table. "Halloween is Samhain, a night when the veil between worlds is thinnest. It's prime time for rituals meant to harness supernatural power." Sarah nodded grimly, recalling her grandfather's warnings about not opening doors best left shut. She flipped through the journal again, landing on an entry from October 31st, 1968. "I heard them chanting tonight. At first I thought it was my imagination, but then I saw the lights. They were at the ridge, gathered around something I couldn't see. When I tried to approach, Harold stopped me, said it was already too late." "That's it," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "They performed a ritual that night. Whatever they summoned, it killed the cows." Elijah leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "And judging by the ley lines, they didn't just summon anything. They tapped into raw, chaotic energy. Energy powerful enough to cause mass destruction if unleashed improperly." Their investigation took a darker turn when Sarah revisited old newspaper clippings and town council minutes. Buried within the archives were subtle hints of a shadowy group operating under the guise of philanthropy and community leadership. Prominent families, the Halloways, the Millers, the Whitmans, were repeatedly mentioned as benefactors of local projects. Yet their names also surfaced in connection with strange disappearances, sudden windfalls, and inexplicable tragedies. Elijah confirmed her suspicions during one late-night session. "These aren't just wealthy elites looking out for themselves," he said. "This is a secret society, probably passed down through generations, using their influence and the land's power to amass wealth and control." He pointed to a faded photograph tucked inside a folder labeled Town Founders Day Celebration, 1952. Among the smiling faces were men Sarah recognized from her grandfather's journal: Harold, Tom, and others who'd attended the secret meeting near the barn. Their expressions were jovial, but there was something unsettling about their eyes, a glint of cold calculation. "They've been here all along," Sarah murmured, pulling strings, covering tracks, silencing anyone who got too close to the truth. Further research revealed chilling parallels between the settlers' rituals and the activities of the secret society. Both groups sought prosperity through forbidden means, believing they could bend supernatural forces to their will. But while the settlers' tragedy in 1903 served as a cautionary tale, the society seemed undeterred, even emboldened by the risks. "They think they're untouchable," Elijah growled, flipping through pages of esoteric texts, "that they can dabble in dark magic without consequences, but they don't understand what they're dealing with. Once you open a door like that, you can't always close it." Sarah's mind raced as she connected the dots. Her grandfather hadn't simply been fighting against greedy developers. He'd been battling a cabal of individuals willing to sacrifice everything, including innocent lives, for personal gain. The cows' deaths weren't collateral damage. They were a warning shot fired by whatever force the society had unwittingly unleashed. As Sarah delved deeper, she uncovered evidence suggesting the society's influence extended far beyond Willow Creek. Bank loans approved under suspicious circumstances, land deals brokered in secrecy, even whispers of blackmail and coercion used to silence dissenters. These weren't isolated acts of corruption. They were systemic, woven into the fabric of the town itself. Her own family hadn't been spared. Thomas's strained relationship with James made more sense now. The elder Harper's refusal to sell the land likely jeopardized the society's plans, earning him their wrath. And when he refused to back down, they turned the entire town against him, isolating him until paranoia consumed him. But Sarah realized something else. Her grandfather hadn't succumbed entirely to fear. He'd fought back in his own way. By hiding the artifacts, documenting the phenomena, and marking the ley lines, he'd left a trail for someone to follow, for her to follow. By the time Sarah finished piecing together the puzzle, she felt a mixture of dread and resolve. The society still existed. She was certain of it. Their actions in 1968 had awakened something ancient and malevolent, and now it was stirring again, drawn to her presence on the land. She glanced at the map once more, tracing the ley lines with her finger. The barn was the epicenter, yes, but the ridge and Miller's Hollow were also critical points. If she wanted to reseal the breach, she'd need to address all three locations simultaneously. Elijah watched her silently, his expression grave. "You're planning to stop it, aren't you?" "I have to," Sarah replied firmly. "If I don't, whatever's buried here will destroy us all." He nodded slowly, respect flickering in his eyes. "Then let's make sure you're ready." Together they devised a plan, combining the protective sigils, herbs, and instructions from Elijah's book with Sarah's intimate knowledge of the property. Every step would be fraught with danger, but neither of them doubted the stakes. As dawn broke over Willow Creek, Sarah packed her supplies and prepared to face the entity head-on. The whispers grew louder, the shadows darker. But she no longer flinched. She understood now what her grandfather had known all along. Some battles couldn't be avoided. Some doors couldn't remain closed forever. It was time to finish what he'd started. Sarah knew she couldn't face the entity alone, not without understanding the full scope of what she was dealing with. And there was only one person left who could provide answers. Richard Hargrove, a wealthy businessman whose family name had been intertwined with Willow Creek's history for generations. His ancestors were among the original settlers, and according to Sarah's research, key figures in the secret society. Richard lived in a sprawling estate on the outskirts of town, its manicured lawns and towering hedges a stark contrast to the decaying farmhouse Sarah called home. As she approached the wrought iron gates, her heart pounded with a mix of fear and determination. This wasn't just about uncovering the truth anymore. It was about holding someone accountable for decades of destruction. The gatekeeper ushered her inside without question. Apparently, Richard had been expecting her. When she entered the opulent study, Richard rose from behind his mahogany desk, his sharp suit and polished demeanor radiating power. Yet beneath his composed exterior, Sarah detected a flicker of unease, a shadow that betrayed the weight of secrets long buried. "Miss Harper," he said smoothly, gesturing for her to sit. "I must admit, I'm surprised you've come knocking. Most people around here prefer to let sleeping dogs lie." "I'm not most people," Sarah replied evenly, refusing to be intimidated. She placed the map and journal on his desk, spreading them out so he could see. "I think you know why I'm here." Richard glanced at the items briefly before leaning back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Your grandfather always was a stubborn man. It seems the apple doesn't fall far from the tree." For several tense minutes, Richard deflected her questions, brushing off accusations of wrongdoing with practiced ease. But Sarah pressed harder, presenting irrefutable evidence. The map marked with ley lines, the artifacts hidden in the barn, and accounts linking his ancestors to both the settlers' rituals and the events of 1968. Finally, he sighed heavily, running a hand over his graying temples. The mask of indifference slipped, revealing the cracks beneath. "You're persistent, I'll give you that. Very well. Let's talk plainly." He stood and poured himself a glass of whiskey, downing it in one gulp before continuing. "Yes, my family, and others like us, sought prosperity through unconventional means. We believed we could harness the land's energy, bend it to our will. What harm could there be in seeking abundance?" "But you crossed a line," Sarah interjected, her voice firm. "You tampered with forces you didn't understand. And when things went wrong, you blamed innocent people. The cows, my grandfather, for your mistakes. Richard flinched but didn't deny it. Instead, he sank into his chair, his gaze distant, as if reliving memories better left forgotten. It started innocently enough, or so we told ourselves. Small rituals, harmless offerings to ensure good harvests. But then ambition took hold. Greed whispered promises of wealth beyond measure. And we listened. His voice grew quieter, tinged with regret. That Halloween night in 1968, we thought we could control it, thought we could contain whatever we summoned. But we underestimated the cost. The moment those lights appeared, we realized our mistake. By then, it was too late. Sarah leaned forward, her pulse racing. What exactly did you summon? What killed the cows? And what's happening now? Richard hesitated, his jaw tightening as if wrestling with whether to continue. Finally, he spoke, his tone heavy with dread. We don't know what it is. Not truly, something ancient, something primal. It's tied to this land, feeding off its energy. When we disturb the ley lines, we weaken the barriers keeping it contained. And the curse, she prompted. It lingers, he admitted grimly. Anyone who dares disturb the site again risks waking it fully. That's why we pressured your grandfather to sell, to keep curious minds away, to protect ourselves from further catastrophe. Sarah felt a surge of anger. Protect yourselves? At what cost? My grandfather spent his life trying to shield this town from the fallout of your greed, and now you expect me to walk away? Richard met her gaze, his expression somber. I don't expect anything from you, Miss Harper, but I warn you, meddling with this will end badly, for all of us. Whatever you think you can do won't change the fact that some doors should never have been opened. As their conversation drew to a close, Richard offered one final piece of advice, or perhaps a confession. If you insist on confronting this thing, remember this: it feeds on fear, on doubt, on weakness. If you show it even a sliver of hesitation, it will consume you. Sarah nodded slowly, absorbing his words. Despite his guilt, she sensed a kernel of truth in his warning. The entity thrived on chaos, exploiting vulnerabilities to spread its influence. To stop it, she'd need more than courage. She'd need resolve. Before leaving, she turned back to face him. You say you wanted prosperity. Did it ever occur to you that true wealth comes from protecting what matters, not exploiting it? Richard didn't respond, but the look in his eyes suggested her words had struck a nerve. As she walked out of the estate, she felt a strange sense of clarity. The past couldn't be undone, but the future still lay within her grasp. Back at the farmhouse, Sarah shared Richard's confession with Elijah, who listened intently, his expression grave. He's right about one thing, Elijah said. This isn't something you defeat, it's something you seal away. And doing so will require every ounce of strength you have. Together they finalized their plan. Using the artifacts, protective sigils, and knowledge gleaned from Elijah's book, Sarah would perform a ritual designed to reinforce the barriers weakened by the society's interference. The process would involve traveling to each critical point marked on the map, the ridge, the barn, and Miller's Hollow, and reciting incantations meant to bind the entity. But time was running out. The whispers grew louder, the shadows darker, and the symbols carved into the land began glowing faintly under moonlight. Whatever force lingered beneath the soil was growing stronger, sensing her presence. As midnight approached, Sarah stood at the edge of the property, staring out at the fields bathed in silver light. Her grandfather's journal rested in her hands, its pages worn but steadfast. She thought of him standing in this same spot decades ago, facing an enemy he couldn't fully comprehend. Now it was her turn. With Elijah by her side and the weight of Willow Creek's history pressing down on her shoulders, Sarah stepped forward into the unknown. The battle ahead would test her limits, but failure wasn't an option. Not for her, not for her family, not for the town. The days leading up to Halloween passed in a blur of preparation and mounting tension. Sarah and Elijah worked tirelessly, gathering supplies and rehearsing the counter-ritual step by painstaking step. Every detail mattered: the placement of salt circles, the alignment of sigils, the precise timing dictated by the ley lines. One misstep could unravel everything. As October 31st approached, the air grew heavy with an unnatural stillness. The fields lay eerily silent, the animals restless but subdued, as if sensing the storm brewing beneath the surface. Even the townsfolk seemed uneasy, though none dared speak of it openly. Whatever force lingered on the Harper farm was stirring, drawn to the convergence of energy that only occurred on this night. By sunset, Sarah stood at the edge of the ridge, her breath visible in the crisp autumn air. Elijah joined her moments later, his arms laden with satchels of herbs, iron nails, and candles carved from beeswax. Together they surveyed the landscape bathed in the dim glow of twilight. This was it, the culmination of weeks of research, sacrifice, and sheer willpower. "Ready?" Elijah asked quietly, his voice steady despite the gravity of the moment. Sarah nodded, clutching the pocket watch her grandfather had left behind. Its frozen hands seemed to hum faintly against her palm, as if resonating with the land itself. "Let's finish this." Their plan was simple, yet perilous. Cleanse each critical point marked on the map, starting with the ridge, moving to the barn, and ending at Miller's Hollow, using a combination of protective sigils, incantations, and offerings meant to appease or repel the entity. Each location would act as a node, reinforcing the barriers weakened by decades of interference. At the ridge, they began by tracing the ancient symbol into the dirt using powdered chalk mixed with salt. Around them, they placed jars containing the dried herbs, their scents mingling with the earthy aroma of fallen leaves. As Elijah chanted softly in a language older than memory, Sarah lit the candles one by one, their flames flickering erratically as if resisting the ritual. The atmosphere shifted almost immediately. A cold wind swept through the field, carrying with it whispers too distorted to understand. Shadows danced at the edges of their vision, twisting and contorting into shapes that defied logic. Sarah clenched her fists, focusing on the words Elijah had taught her, repeating them under her breath like a mantra. When the final candle flared brightly before extinguishing itself, the ground trembled briefly, and the whispers ceased. They'd succeeded, at least for now.